Righty. Well, I can skimp on my intro because if you were... Yeah, I'll pass this along. So I can skimp on my intro because I hope most of you, I think most are familiar faces from before. Okay.
I think that mic's on.
Yeah. It is on. Yeah, there we go. That's definitely reinforced now. Okay, much better. All right, well, I can keep my intro short anyway. I'm Mike Lloyd. I do think logistically this is going to be interesting. I thought we were the barrier between you and getting drinks, but apparently not. You already have the drinks. I did once do an event like this where I was between the audience and the bar. That gave you really good feedback on whether the audience was engaged or not. I hope you can keep it as interactive and give us as much feedback this time. So we definitely want to encourage keeping this interactive. We do have a couple of questions we wanted to discuss, but I think we'd very much appreciate, especially as you get a little bit of alcohol in you, if you feel like interrupting, if you have comments, let us know, okay? So I'm going to pass this along for a round of intros, starting with Phil.
How's it going? I'm Phil Melcher. I'm Director of Security, so I cover everything security related at Busch Stadium, which includes the cyber, physical, personnel, executive protection, everything. So,
that's a good job. Hi, everyone. I'm Jaffe. I have sort of two jobs. In my day job, I lead cyber and physical security for Dell Technologies for all of our consumer-facing work, and then I also am the president of the Global Center for Cybersecurity at Cortex here in St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Pete Hogan with Post Holdings. I'm the Chief Technology Officer and also the Chief Privacy Officer.
Hi, I'm Andrew Wilder. I'm the Vice President and CISO for Hillenbrand, and I don't do anything with physical security.
That's good. You should keep it that way if you can.
You can keep the microphone and we can pass it back and forth as we discuss stuff. So we've all done panels like this before. Admittedly, I usually sit over there, not over here, so I'm going to have to encourage the panelists to kick me if I start talking too much, because it's really supposed to be a conversation where we hear from the panelists on various topics that we collected up that we thought would be interesting. But if you do a lot of these, there tends to be, a lot of broad themes in security where people will go on for a while and try and make 5 or 6 or 7 points. If you heard my talk earlier, I tend to do that. I tend to barrel on. And so we tried to set ourselves a goal here of try to get these down to the one thing you need to know in each topic. So I'm pre-selling that. I think everybody here agreed we would try and do that. Well, let's see how well we can do. So I do have a collection of questions we can talk about, and let's see if we can boil them down to the one top-of-mind thing in each of these areas. And the first thing when we gathered together and started figuring out what to talk about on this panel was ransomware. Right, we heard quite a bit about that in various talks today. So I don't know which order we want to go into. Let's start with Andrew maybe and work back this way. You came to give us, your top-of-mind thought.
What is ransomware, Dr. Mike? No, so I think the biggest takeaway that I have on ransomware now, and when we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, is I think the best defense that you can have against ransomware, and this is arguable, this is my personal opinion, is a really strong backup program. So having good backups, testing your backups all the time, testing your restores, making sure that your backups are encrypted and you can restore that data and make your business work that way, I think that is arguably the best defense against ransomware, because you're getting infected, you're going to get it, right? It's just how prepared are you to recover for it? So that's my one thing.
I don't disagree with backups, but I'm never going to repeat something anyone else said. So another very key important one would be anti-malware. Because when you do get infected, how do you stop it from moving laterally quickly, and how do you identify it and block it at its source in as close to near real time as possible? So I'm going to go with a very solid, fully implemented anti-malware rollout.
So I think we all agree with the idea of having sort of one key topic each. What at least I didn't count on was that we didn't coordinate what those were going to be ahead of time. So as you sort of find yourself a little bit further left or right of the conversation, what's the third key thing?
Yeah, we'll try and switch up the order, just make it slightly less unfair.
So I certainly agree with both the comments the other panelists have made. I guess one thing I would say, and this, I don't know how many of you have had personal experiences with this. I won't ask you to raise hands. I have. And I'll tell you, there's a human element of this that I think you can only experience by experiencing. And maybe I'll give an example. So completely agree with the points that were made here before. But if you imagine yourself in a scenario where you're trying to cope with a ransomware outbreak in your own network and you find yourself in a scenario where, God willing, you have good backups and know how to recover from them, and you're in the process of trying to figure out what that looks like, and then maybe all of a sudden you're trying to figure out how you're going to communicate with the person who leads your infrastructure, and of course you can't send him an email because your email's down, and then you're going to try to go call him, but of course you don't know his phone, so you're going to go type that into your Outlook to find his contact number, but of course your Outlook's down, right? And then you start to realize sort of the number of things you have to have actual physical processes for, things written down, things that are actually separate and offline and air-gapped. So again, whole range of life experience before my current role, where I've had the unfortunate circumstance of having to walk through a couple of these things. I will say that just sort of thinking through from what it actually, we don't always recognize how much of our processes rely on something that's digital that you actually need to be able to have a keyboard interface to. Even simple things like calling someone on the phone or calling your treasurer to have them get online with somebody at a bank to be able to figure out what it takes to recover from something like this. All that, usually even the numbers, the contact information, the plans rely on technology. So human processes, long-winded way of saying what should have been a simple thing.
So I'd agree with everything that was just said. If you're going to do this, I think it's a holistic approach. So taking a bit of what each one of us says, I think I would talk about what I heard today as far as segmentation. 6 years ago when I was teaching cybersecurity intelligence and counterintelligence at Webster, I called it compartmentalizing your different parts of the network, different parts of information, so that even if one area gets compromised, you have protections for some of those golden nuggets of your company or organization that you protect, that not everybody has access to and not everybody needs access to, and making sure that we understand the difference, from the IT perspective, as far as IT wants everybody to talk. They want everybody to talk to everybody, and that's their job. My computer's down. How can I talk to these people? Cybersecurity, on the other hand, we're trying to limit the people that you're talking to or who has access to what. So I think that segmentation is really critical to what we do as well for ransomware.
Well, these are fantastic answers. Indeed, I love your point on IT versus security, right? Did people catch Mark, the guy from First Bank, his comment about offline backups? That was a real zinger, right? That's the conflict you're talking about. That's the idea of, we security people, we love the idea of offline backups for this very reason, and yet all of the IT industry is all about, no, of course you want it live, because that's more powerful, that's more flexible, you'll have more use of your backups, until you think from a paranoid security point of view. So, all I'm doing is echoing Mark's point, that I thought that was a really great zinger to think about, how are you going to convince your IT people that you need offline backups that have less functionality? Yeah, go ahead. If you have.
Well, and going back to what he said about the processes around that, because if you have offline copies, they could be stale if someone doesn't do it once a quarter. If there's not a process around doing it twice a year, and it's just whenever we think about it, then your whole team could have changed. And those numbers that he talked about, contacts, you don't have those up to date. It's a combination of both of those that are technology related.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, so when you were talking about backups, ransomware, what people used to generally think of it is, I'm going to hold on to your data, you're never going to have it again, and that's why you have the backup. But now it's evolving. So now I'm going to hold on to your data. Oh, you don't want to do anything about it. Now I'm going to post everything in a RAID form. And now that I'm posting everything in your RAID form, now I collected all that data. Now I know who your vendors and third party are, and I'm going to start compromising them and sending them emails in a reply chain attack or something like that. And then if that doesn't work, now they're going to insider threats and being like, hey, COVID sucks, you're not getting paid enough, you're not getting the training you want. Why don't I go ahead and pay you for clicking this one thing for me? And now I have an insider threat, ransomware, hybrid mud baby, or whatever you want to call it. I don't know, some weird, grouping of everything else. So are you guys as CTOs thinking about the evolving of ransomware as it goes down?
Honestly, I haven't thought about the ransomware mud baby yet.
But now you have that image.
Yeah, because you've heard of the double ransomware already. I probably don't need the microphone, I'm super loud. And that's exactly what you were talking about. We're like, okay, I'm going to ransomware your computers because your stuff is locked, but also, by the way, I have your data. So you're going to have to pay me a ransom to unlock it, but you're also going to have to pay me a ransom to not exfiltrate the data that I've already taken. So you're talking about, the mud baby is the double, triple ransomware thing where you have these other vectors. I agree with you that having backups is not going to be the solution for that. That's why you really have to have a defense in depth approach, a layered approach, and all the things that the panelists were talking about to block all of those different things. But you're right, it's morphing and changing and getting scarier every day.
Well, I want to comment on that one as well. Let's not lose sight of the fact that means we at least won one of the battles, right? They do not move on their techniques unless we are getting better at stopping the techniques that already work, right? So the mud baby is a great point, but it means all of the effort we put in.
Hashtag mud baby trending.
And if I could add something else, so one of the things, that I think you also have to look at is not just the network side of it, but looking at your own website or your own company's website from the outside in. Whether I'm doing a vulnerability assessment or a threat assessment against a stadium or our network or anything, I always look at it how I can attack it from the outside in and not how I can protect it from the inside out. Okay, so I'm always looking at our company's website. What kind of information do we have out there? Are our executives putting out too much information about themselves that could later be targeted? What's their social media presence? What's our employees? What are they posting on social media? Those are all different things about our companies and about our organizations that, from an internal standpoint, could be exploited by some bad actor out there. And so, these are things, so it's not just looking at the networks, not just looking at your firewalls, at your malware protection. It's all of those things. So it really is this holistic approach that you're taking, that you're looking at, and it's much more, and I hate to keep using the word, but it's a much more holistic approach where you're looking at all these different sides of it. Because if you're not doing that and then working with every single group within your own organization and having everybody on the same sheet of music instead of just IT department's doing this, cyber department's doing this, and nobody's talking to each other. But you've still got the finance people over here, HR's over here, and everybody's got to be in on it. So it really is a big picture approach.
What do you think about wargaming for that, right? Because one of the challenges here is there's a rush to get the point solution for the point problem. You're not talking about that. You're talking about something much broader.
Right. So we do tabletop exercises for all kinds of things, whether we've actually done cyber attacks, we've done active shooter, things like all these different types of scenarios, bringing in all of the necessary parties to sit around and discuss these different scenarios that could play out. And just going through that, the one thing about security, whether it's cyber, whether it's physical, personnel, executive protection, is you never, ever go, I'm done. I'm good. I got everything set. Every day there's going to be something new happening. One thing I used to do when I taught was I would tell my students, I want an article about cyber every single week, and I want you to speak to that article. I never got the same article ever. There was always something new. There was always some new threat. There was always some new tool. There was always something new, week to week, and student to student. Never got a repeat article, ever. So I think that goes and that lends to the fact that we can never kind of relax and go, okay, we got everything good now. Yes?
Okay, so going off of that, like with the tabletop exercise, and you're going through these things, how do you deal with it, like when it's almost like a conflict of interest, right? Where maybe like that person who's trying to sell tickets to the most amount of people, and then you have this physical security person who's saying, hey, this is kind of capacity, we can't fit this many more people in a box for this event, that we're hosting at Bush Stadium.
Sure.
Like similarly, we might have like finance who's saying, our North Star is, the SLAs and turnover and how quickly we can close out these PO requests.
Right.
Versus like we're looking at third-party risk management and these gates. So how do you balance that amongst like the different programs that you mentioned?
Well, if you're not, number one, if you're not talking with everybody, you're never going to have that discussion. And your organization is going to be in conflict just from the start. So I think being able to have the discussion is good because within the organization, ultimately somebody's going to make the decision. This is what I want. This is how I want you to do it. And it's a matter of everybody kind of agreeing to, okay, here's the middle ground where we can all come to. So I wouldn't say, like, everybody goes, well, what's your solution to active shooter? Well, until you have one, you can't pigeonhole a response or anything because each one's going to be different. And just like an attack, they're all going to be different. There's so many variables that that's why that communication is critical. And I'm sorry.
I just want to comment on the mud baby. I really like that term, and I'm going to steal it. So I guess when you asked, are we thinking about it? I think the other thing to consider is data loss identification. What did they get? If you've put in, the reason I answered anti-malware is if you protected it so it can't spread, if you understand what was on the PC or the server that was taken, and then you get these ransomware threats, you know how to respond to that far better. You can blow that off. What if it was an individual's PC and there's nothing of any value on that? Go ahead, post it. You have different options based on the understanding of the data that was taken. So I think that's what it really boils down to. And to quote Phil, it's different circumstances. If they got your most critical server, like something in their data lake, you would respond very differently to that than you would if they got, the intern's new laptop that was issued 2 weeks ago, right? So I think that's how I like to think about that too. Is we've had to talk about those kind of tabletop exercises, and we set up different levels of responses based on what they got, and I think that's really what determines the action.
I think that's brilliant, right? This idea that, of course, if you know that. But it's that if, right? It's like in real estate, they say it's location, location, location. What's that for us? Inventory, 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 right? If you don't know what's there and what function it has, what data it is, then you have to assume it's the critical stuff when they come calling, right? You have to be able to know. So, don't neglect inventory, right? We feel like dentists a lot, right? We're trying to nag people about flossing their teeth, right? You just have to keep telling people over and over. They know, everybody knows, but they give us the same speech every time anyway because people just don't want to do it. Well, inventory is the same kind of thing, right? You got to focus on inventory. Still, I think we covered a lot of ground on ransomware. Really appreciate the interaction as well. So please do keep the questions coming. But I think if we want more disagreement among the panel, the second question might do for that. Yes. That's zero trust, right? Because not all the booths are down yet, but you can, the drinking game these days is to go to RSA or one of the big conferences, and you have to drink every time you see a Z on a booth, right? And it gets real drunk really, really fast. So zero trust, it's all the rage. There's an awful lot of fog. There's an awful lot of expansion of what the term means. It's really getting nebulous, hard to nail down. So the challenge, I think, for the panel is, if you were trying to start a zero trust program or trying to give somebody advice who was trying to get started on it, what do you think is the one most important thing in approaching zero trust?
I'm not going to go first.
Yeah, you don't have to.
So I'm very conflicted on zero trust because I tend to look at it also from zero defect. And I tend to look at any program that starts with the word zero as being designed by a lawyer who sees zero risk. So no dig on any attorneys in here, but anyway, sorry. But so I'm conflicted in it because as a security person, you tend not to trust and you tend to be very suspicious and very cautious. So from that aspect, I think there's some good things inherent in that, in the concept of zero trust, but also from a being able to do business type perspective, I think it can be conflicted. So I'm kind of taking both sides on this a little bit.
It's a tough one.
Yes.
So I'm a huge proponent, and I think maybe if I just sort of zoom out for a minute and try to speak sort of somewhat optimistically and maybe a little bit strategically, I think we're at a maybe unique inflection point where some of the things that are changing in society right now and in sort of the technology architecture, the way we operate, are providing opportunities to do things that we almost never would be able to do. I don't usually quote Vladimir Lenin in panel appearances like this, but I think he had a fairly famous saying where he said something along the lines of, there are centuries where nothing happens, and then there are years when centuries happen. And it does strike me as we're sort of living through one of those times where the pace of the technology change that's happening and the amount of sort of disruption that we're living through now is causing a transformation in work from home, sort of cloud-based everything, the shift to sort of us rebuilding our infrastructure in places where we didn't have it before to be able to meet business demands that we didn't anticipate or anticipated but thought it was going to be a 10-year sort of architectural ramp and then just happened. So there's a real opportunity to actually think through concepts we'd like to apply, like zero trust, but be able to do them in sort of what would otherwise be a radical change, but now just seems like a response to a business imperative. So I'm a huge proponent of it, and I think the one thing I would just say is start with the new stuff. Start with where you're transforming. Don't start by trying to transform your legacy infrastructure to be zero trust overnight. Start with the thing that your business is actually doing, moving to a brand new domain, and implement zero trust there natively right away. I mean, it just seems like such a rare opportunity.
Find it's broken that these big companies that are supposed to tell us what's broken aren't telling us.
Well, I think this is a question that sets up for controversy, which is something we certainly wanted find ways to make it interesting with differences of opinion. I'm going to dangle my foot over the bear trap here and say, okay, if we realize that commercial pressure means all the companies that you might want to acquire are specialists, right? I mean, our capitalist system is designed around make your company really, really good at the widget that you make and don't worry about anything else. And we as security professionals see what you see as, oh my God, that means they're going to be really bad, really bottom drawer at everything they can get away with other than the main thing they're specializing in. That's a really bad recipe. And what's the answer to that? Here's the bear trap: government regulation, right? That's what we do for buildings. Right? How come we're not afraid of getting this building collapsing while we're in it or catching fire? Well, buildings used to catch fire when they were just freely built by whoever could save money by throwing a building up real quick. And we didn't say all buildings must be perfectly fireproof, right? You definitely have to gauge this sort of stuff. You need to actually establish best practices for building fireproof buildings, right? And then you have to enforce these minimum standards and then let people innovate in how creative they like the lighting to be and how they like the place to look and how they want the air conditioning to be, right? But for the really life-threatening stuff, you have to establish some kind of baseline of you must be this tall to ride this ride, and you have to be able to enforce it. And we don't have that today.
So I definitely agree with that from sort of a philosophical point of view. I mean, it's completely, I think, clear probably to all of us in the room that there's a certain amount of sort of minimum standard that needs to be applied, should be applied in segments of the economy and categories of technology. And I 100% agree that government has and will have a role to play in that.
Damn, I was hoping to get an argument going with that. But
Well, I'm about to argue with you, though.
Good.
So I think, again, not knowing the audience completely, maybe there are some folks in the room for whom that will be a very practical sort of application step to go back and create a standard which then can be applied to the industry. I think for the rest of us, though, that as true as that is, that's probably not a thing that goes that we take back and that solves our problem for us. I do think if I could maybe offer two, really breaking the spirit of what we said in two quick instead of one long answer, I'd say it's very hard to change a procurement decision once somebody in the organization already has sort of a business imperative behind that decision, right? So if they've already decided, they've come to you with, hey, I got this vendor that's going to transform my business process here from losing money to making money. It's going to save me, 50% of the person hours it takes to do this task. Good luck going to try to tell them, well, they're a C- in security according to my scorecard. You should really go back to square one and re-engineer your CRM process so you can, pick this B+1. So I think it's important to be able to go set a reasonable baseline for security in your vendor process proactively, right? So before they start the process, here's my standard. These are the policies. This is what I expect. My expectation floor is here. And do that and get that in your procurement process early and get that before any of those business imperative conversations come to you where they've already picked the one they want.
if they can't fog a mirror, you can't buy them.
That's right. And then I'd say and then when they do come to you and you've got, your letter grade, it's much easier to be able to influence the vendor who's ready, on the precipice of being able to get that deal signed and say, hey, these are the three things that I'm really uncomfortable. Here's the plan that I have for you to be able to action and improve those so you meet my standard. You can set a good floor, and you can make them better choices instead of necessarily trying to twist someone's arm after they've already decided what business process they can transform with the vendor they already decided they want to pay.
Anybody else got an angle of third party? If not, I think we have, one more general conversation we had when we were sort of thinking as a panel about what should we cover today. I thought this was a really good question. It was just about human factors, right? Because we spent a day talking about technology, and there's only been a few mentions, a few good mentions that I heard of human factors. So, we can't just wave a magic wand and give every employee the gift of security awareness and insight, right? That was a phrase from conversation. But okay, so given that we can't do that, given that we can't just bless people with the magic pixie dust of understanding not to click on links, what is the most important thing to do, right? Given that the humans are still going to behave like humans, what do you do? Just more training classes? Fire all the idiots?
Yeah, not just more training classes. Man, that's boring stuff. So when I was at Nestle, and at one point I was globally in charge of security awareness, what I really wanted to do was phishing exercises. And the executive board said, no way, we're going to be attacking our own people. And then something bad happened in Treasury, and that's as far as I'm going to go. And the CEO changed his mind. And we started doing phishing exercises. So, listen, a lot of the things we've talked about today are not 100% the greatest thing you could ever possibly do. But I think if you want to baseline your organization for one of the number one attack vectors, arguably, scanning for vulnerable routers or whatever could be there too. But I think it's a pretty decent tool that we have today to baseline maturity, find who your clickers are, give those people additional training, and maybe they have to watch that 60-minute video or whatever. But I think that's kind of the best we got right now is phishing training.
But and anybody should feel free to answer, but I think I'll take that last point. Even if we decide, okay, there are some people who just never stop clicking, and then you give them remedial special training, does that even work, or do they still keep clicking after that?
If your policy is good enough, you can go, hey, do it once, do it twice, do it 3 times. Now you're going to go to HR and have disciplinary action, which can include termination.
Well, and
it's not a joke. You could lose millions of dollars by some idiot clicking on the wrong thing.
Or a wall chain.
Yep. Well, so just straw poll out here. Has anybody actually had to take HR action because somebody just would not respond to security awareness training? Panelists, yes. Audience, no.
So we have, and I think that I completely agree. I think that's important. I maybe have a sort of philosophical point to make here, though, and this will be the last thing I say. I'm going to shut up after this.
But 2 philosophical points.
2 philosophical points. I think more often than not, and there are exceptions to this, like where I imagine there are sociopaths in the world, but most people are not necessarily good people or bad people that want to do bad things when they come into the office, as opposed to good things when they come into the office. Almost all human beings do the things they're incented to do. Mm-hmm. And there are ways to influence the people's incentives. One is, punishment. Another is reward, right? And there are really powerful ways you can kind of work with human nature to reward people for. I don't know what some of you spend on your phishing and training budget, but a $10 gift card every time someone submits an actual phishing message to your phishing inbox may go a lot further for a lot less than, trying to fire people every time too, right? So there are combinations of things, right? And you can figure out what's the right sort of balance for your organization. But social pressure matters too, right? So in addition to sort of negative social pressure, like this person keeps clicking, there's also positive social pressure, right? Like reward and praising people who, recognizing them publicly from whatever level in the organization.
Public recognition is free.
Yeah. There are plenty of things you can do that sort of work with the grain of human nature, right? So I just sort of encourage that as a other side of the coin of the sort of the more corrective measures. Both are important, right? I mean, people are influenced different ways, but 2 sides to that.
I'm going to build on that just a little bit. So in the areas where you have key processes to protect, and I think you talked a little bit about this earlier, Andrew. Yeah, so I'm going to go with, just finance and procurement. Let's just Treasury as well. They're targeted. So how would somebody really socially engineer that well? Well, the first thing they do is that if one of your third parties was hacked, they would send an email to those folks from a legitimate email address in that third party saying, hey, Susie is no longer your contact, it's now Bob. They'd wait a week or two, and then they'd get another email from Bob saying, hey, I need you to change this accounting number. So the best way to help your people in that, and that would seem, and it would come from a legitimate third-party email, it would, and unless they went back in time and looked who their contact was and validated it, they wouldn't know. But if they first took care of the contact, then asked for the routing number, that would be really hard to catch. So I think the best way you could help them is anytime you touch supplier contact information or routing numbers, what if there was a workflow process that required multiple steps before you could actually do it? You help your people not to be able to make those mistakes. Put a process in place that wasn't optional, that just protected your critical data, such as, that's just one example, but if you found what are the 10 top things you're trying to protect and put process approval in like that, it's simple, it can be automated to the right people, and now multiple people have to think about it first. So I think that's just a way, I just go back to the theme of helping the people so they can think less and they don't always have to be as aware, wherever you can.
So, so from different aspects, we red team the Cardinals both from a physical security side and a cyber side. We use the program as a training and a teaching program as opposed to a punitive program. Now, we've had people that have gone beyond that and repeated it and showed some kind of malice that were dealt with in a different manner. However, we utilize those programs to get better. I mean, that's why you do them. You do those programs to get better, not to punish people. I think one of the big things that I've seen with companies, and I saw with my present company, unfortunately, before I got there, was they did all of that stuff and then did nothing with the information, because this is bad news, and we don't want to let anybody know the bad news, because bad news is bad. But unless you're addressing that bad news and really dealing with the information and training and teaching those people and retraining, or maybe finding someplace else where they can work. Maybe they don't need to be in ticket sales. Maybe they need to be in popcorn sales. You may have a different role for that person that's better suited to that individual. But I think it's really critical that we understand that people are that wild card. People are, you never know when somebody's going to pop that last Fruit Loop and just, lose their crap and come to work either as a disgruntled employee or something like that. Something's going wrong at home. They didn't get the promotion they want. You never know. So you're looking at people, and as, they are definitely part of the system. They are definitely your weakest link. So if you're not looking at insider threat, if you don't have an insider threat program in your organization, start one. Things like that are really critical, because I've seen, but it goes to policy, it goes to communication. If you're walking somebody out the door and you haven't already turned off their computer access before you even told them they were being fired, that's wrong, okay? I had a guy that I knew 6 months after leaving one of the largest financial firms in St. Louis, and I won't say the name, 6 months afterwards, still had his account active, could access customer accounts, could make transactions, and everything. Now, he left under good circumstances, but it doesn't matter. That's a policy thing where you could, that's a switch. That's a communication between HR and IT that's a hole that creates this huge vulnerability and doesn't cost you anything. So I think from that people standpoint and those things, I think these are all part of the people things we need to be conscious of and address, just as importantly as the systems and the firewalls and the protection and the malware protection. So, excellent.
No, excellent stuff. Well, we've covered an awful lot of ground. We are the barrier between these good folks and the bar over there. Maybe we'll try and just wrap it all up with, today's Wednesday, everybody's got to go back to work Thursday morning. Is there one thing that each of us wants to toss out as the thing to make sure you're paying attention to as you end up back at your desk, even if it's at home, tomorrow morning?
Asset inventory.
I go back to the processes. If you don't know what you're going to do when one of these things we're talking about happens, then go back and figure out what you're going to do when it does.
You know, I go to those threat and vulnerability assessments and know what it is you're protecting. You know, prioritize what it is you're protecting. You know, that prioritization and risk and looking at, you know, what's going to cost us the most and where are we the most vulnerable, and is there even a valid threat? Because a lot of people, baseball has these overarching rules, MLB, and one of the things they tell us to do is have radiac meters to test for radiological threats in mailroom. Last time I looked, there wasn't a big threat with ISIS nuking baseball teams. So that's not an area where I'm really going to throw my assets, because that's an area that doesn't seem like a smart expenditure. Whereas there are other areas that are going to be much better suited with my attention and my assets.
Excellent. Well, I think as we are the barrier between you good folks and one more drink, I think I'd ask you to join me in thanking our excellent panel here. Any other questions? I think we're still around. I intend to get something to drink.